Hello to everyone who may be watching. I was trying to go live over on Facebook and it wasn't allowing me. So I've decided to come over here on my YouTube channel, and I'm hoping some people will follow me over. If they don't, I'll post the link and everybody can watch that. What I am reading in the next few chapters of my original story, The Calling, which I had started a few days ago in Facebook Live. So I'm going to read the next few chapters, and I hope you find it enjoying. And, well, let's find out what's happening to Penny, that little mermaid, who just turned into a mermaid and discovered that, life isn't what it should be. So this is chapter 7, The Reveal. Mama, Penny said, swam around much in the same way her mother was doing right this moment, directly in front of her, while sporting a lovely emerald green tail streaked through with delicate lines of violet, and talking to her underwater. She shook her head. Mama shouldn't be able to talk. I shouldn't be able to hear her. I shouldn't be able to breathe underwater. I shouldn't have a tail. Lee, however, didn't seem nearly as shocked as her daughter. Oh, honey, I have always wanted to see your tail, and it's so beautiful. She circled Penny, admiring her cobalt blue tail speckled with flecks of crimson and gold. I never imagined you would have such a standout feature. Penny held up her hands. Mama, what's going on? Lee swam along her daughter's right side and did a backflip before twisting around and putting a comforting hand upon her shoulder. Penny, darling, what exactly do you think is happening? Well, she glanced toward the surface of the pool, which was now maybe 12 feet above her head. I got in the water and I changed. And I grew a tail. You did. Drew in a deep breath, completely pushing out of her mind the fact that she was drawing in water instead of air. You jumped in the pool and your legs changed into a tail, just like mine did. Lee nodded slowly, her hair bobbing in the water. Now that all this is happening, do you know what it means? The word rested right on the tip of Penny's tongue. It had actually been there ever since she looked down and saw what happened to her legs. It means Lee took her daughter's hand. You can say the word. It's all right if you do. Penny spun and faced her mother. We're mermaids. Lee wrapped her arm around her daughter's shoulder and gave her a tight hug. Oh, I've waited so long for this moment. She kissed her cheek. Of course, I wasn't certain if this was actually going to happen, but Penny gave her tail a hard flick and pushed back away from her mother. How can we be mermaids? They don't exist. Really? Lee laughed, though it sounded far stranger than anything Penny had heard before. Honey, if there are no such thing as mermaids, then what are we? That was a question Penny couldn't answer. If her mother and she hadn't transformed into mermaids, then the only other explanation for this was that she was dying and suffering from a hallucination, and that didn't seem like much of a realistic possibility. She swam around her mother, examining her closely. She finally maneuvered herself close to her mother's wide and delicate fin and gave it a light touch. Wow. Lee looked down and smiled. Like that? It's like touching warm silk. Penny ran her hand along the tail. So soft, but it's so strong. With a slight flick of her tail, she was facing her mother again. How? What is all this? Let's sit. Lee nodded toward the bottom of the deep end. I'll tell you everything. And now we move on to chapter 8, The Talk. Leanne led Penny to the deepest part of the pool and sat in the corner, their backs against the wall with their tails stretched out before them. Lee noticed how relaxed Penny had become after being in the water for a few minutes. After being in the water for only a few minutes, she's already grown acclimated. Genetic memory has taken over. Are you comfortable? Penny nodded. I have a question, though. How are we talking underwater? You know how dolphins speak to one another with clicks and whistles? Penny nodded. We're doing the same. To your ears, it now sounds like we're speaking normally to each other. Penny nearly rolled her eyes. How could I know how to talk like this? Because you were born knowing the language. All mermaids are like this. It's due to genetic. Our lungs are extremely efficient. They're almost like giant sponges where air is concerned. Because of that, they're able to extract all the oxygen we need from water. Lee chuckled. This is one of the reasons why we can hold our breath so long. The reason I pulled you out of the water the other day was because you could have held your breath a lot longer than 3 minutes. Penny gave her mother a quizzical look, like maybe 10 minutes? Lee smiled back. The longest I've held my breath was about 80 minutes. You probably could have stayed on it for 30, 40 minutes easy. Wow. Penny ran her hand along part of the length of her tail before turning to her mother. What are you going to tell me? That I was born in the Pacific Ocean, off the Oregon coast. That both my mothers are still alive. Mothers? Don't you have a father? No, ours is a matriarchal society. There are no mermen. I grew up in our pod. That's what we call an extended mermaid family. When I left there were about 45 of us. Most pods had between 20 and 30 mermaids at any one time. Something about what her mother said drew Penny's interest. So I've got 2 grandmothers. Her mother nodded. Yes. Any other relatives? I have a couple of aunts, and I'm sure you have a few nieces by now. Penny found it almost fascinating that she had an unknown family living somewhere nearly impossible, and she was just now learning about them. Why did you leave? Lee shrugged. I was 18 and I wanted to see the world beyond the ocean. I told my mothers I was going up to the land of the walkers and spend some time among humans. She wrapped an arm around Penny's shoulder. Many mermaids do this. Both my mothers spent time on dry land before returning to the pod, so I thought I'd do the same. So not long after my 18th birthday, the pod threw a party for me and wished me to have a great adventure on land. And with that, I swam off and came to the surface at Cape Lookout in Oregon. I found clothes and money. Penny shook her head. How did you do that? Did another mermaid meet you? No, silly. This time Lee laughed. You know the story about how mermaids can lure men to their deaths by singing? Uh-huh. It's what we call the siren song. We can manipulate our voice in a way to make humans do things for us. Not just men, but women as well. It's really only effective when you're dealing with people one-on-one, but when you're in a pinch and you need something, we usually use this ability. That's what I did. I managed to get a ride into the town of Tillamook, found clothing and food and a little money, then made my way into Portland and found a job. I worked there for a few years, and with the money I made, I began working my way southward and inland. I eventually found my way to Albuquerque and began working in a landscaping job because, as you've seen, I'm extremely good with foliage. I was so good, in fact, that after about 10 years, I managed to become a partner in the company, and 5 years after that, I bought it. Everything about work was pretty much what Penny had heard before, though she had never quite heard it. This timeline is explained by her mother. And there was another question as well. Is this where you met my father? Or did you go back to the ocean and I have a mother there? Once again, Lee gave her daughter a squeeze around the shoulders. No, honey, your father is human. You see, every so often I'd head back to Oregon so I could see the ocean and feel it draw me forward. I guess you could say it was a test of my strength pertaining to my time on land. When I met your father, I was almost ready to go back to the pod for a while, just to visit. Instead, that night I met him in the lounge of a hotel where I was staying in Tillamook. And there was something about him that just said... A dreamy look filled her eyes as the memory of seeing her daughter's father came rushing back. He told me I was ready to have a child. A couple of weeks later, I found out I was going to have one. She touched Penny on the tip of her nose. You. Before this, Penny had been told little about her father. She didn't even know if he and her mother had been married at the time she was born. Now she was learning the truth. Her father was a stranger her mother had only met so she could have a baby. Did you ever meet him again? Lee shook her head. No, I didn't. The next morning I drove back to Albuquerque. I never gave him my phone number or told him where I lived. I know it sounds somewhat selfish, but I only wanted him so I could have you. After you were born, I divided my time between the business and raising you. There were stories that mermaids who had children by human fathers often had human children, but in the last couple of years, I'd begun to see the signs that told me you weren't going to be fully human. You'd become as much a daughter of the sea as me. That was one of the reasons I wanted to keep you away from water as much as possible. I knew the moment you got into deep water, the genetic instinct in you to transform your legs into a tail would take over, and Penny looked down at her body. I'd be like this. Exactly. She gave her mother a hard stare. So is this going to happen every time I go swimming? Not at all. Lee flashed a bright smile. Now that it's happened, you'll be able to control the transformation. The thing is, the moment you get into deep water like this, the urge to become your true self is going to grow strong. You're going to have to learn how to fight that feeling. Penny looked up toward the surface of the pool. How am I going to do that without practice? Lee flicked her tail and moved off the floor of the pool. She turned to face her daughter. Let's swim for a little while. Let's swim a little while I tell you about the surprise I've been working on. Now is chapter 9, the present. The drive back to Albuquerque happened only after Penny swam for almost 3 hours with her mother. During that time, she mastered complete control over her ability to function as a mermaid and to transform from mermaid to human and back. Penny discovered that in order to transform her legs to a tail and back to legs, it was necessary for her to be in contact with a certain amount of water, such as an ocean, lake, or swimming pool. Lee told her that the smallest bodies of water in which she could transform was a bathtub, and she would need to fill it up about 2/3 of the way for it to affect her. While going home, Penny discovered 2 new things. One, she discovered her mother's true age. She was 47. Penny had always thought her mother looked far younger than that, maybe late 20s, maybe early 30s, but never someone nearly 50 years old. Lee said it was because mermaids age slowly and that it was possible for both of them to live to be almost 200 years old. The other thing she discovered was that her mother was installing a pool in the backyard. Now that Penny had come into her own as a mermaid, Lee saw no reason to keep her from the environment in which her mother had grown up. It may not be like swimming in the ocean, her mother told her, but it would allow Penny to spend at least half the summer being her other self without having to leave the backyard. There was one stipulation, however. While Penny could have her friends over to swim, she could never reveal to them what she really was. She could never tell them that she wasn't truly human. Over the years, I thought several times of telling a few of my friends what I was, maybe even showing them. Lee gripped the steering wheel and looked straight ahead down the interstate. And every time I got closer to wanting to reveal myself, I'd get overcome with fear that something bad would happen if I did that. Whenever I thought I wanted to tell my closest friends that I was really a creature they thought of as mythical, eventually I realized I couldn't. Lee reached over and patted her daughter's hand. My biggest fear is that some lab, some agency would take me and put me in an aquarium to study, and that I'd end up spending the rest of my life there until I died, or until they killed me. She glanced over at Penny, then back to the road. And I fear they could do the same to you. They'd probably want to know everything about how you worked, especially if they discovered your father was human. I can't have anyone hurting you, Penny. It would kill me if something happened because you told people what we are. Penny shook her head. That won't happen, Mama. She glanced out the passenger window at the desert beyond. I'll keep our secret. You know you can trust me. Now, chapter 10, the summer. By the end of June, construction on the pool was complete, and it was filled with water a few days later. Penny was ecstatic that she finally had a place to swim, and it wouldn't be necessary for her to visit her friends' homes after spending days convincing her mother she wouldn't tread water in the deep end. Now that she knew what she was, however, there was no need to convince her mother that she had a need to go swimming. The pool took up as much of the backyard as was feasible. Next to the house, there was enough room for comfortable walking areas and access to the filtration system. But on the southeast and southwest areas around the pool, it came to within a few feet of the fence, giving people just enough room to walk around it if necessary. The one thing that made their pool different from others Penny had seen was the depth. There was only a small shallow section near the shaded patio, which quickly fell off at a sharp angle so that almost half the pool was 25 feet deep. Penny knew why this was necessary. Her mother wanted her to be able to swim deep. Just like that day, Penny discovered her true nature. Lee told Penny that if any of her friends were asked why the pool was so abnormally deep, she was to tell them they were both considering taking up scuba diving. The pool was filled and heated by June 30th, which means that the next morning, July 1st, they could swim. Penny was ready, though the truth was she'd been ready to swim ever since her return from Plaskatus, where she'd learned the controls switching from human to mermaid form. As she had practiced at Plaskatus, Penny held her legs together and willed a transformation. In a matter of seconds, her limbs fused together and began forming the beautiful scaled tail she had seen for the last time a month ago. With the transformation complete, she drew in a deep breath of water to saturate her lungs, then swam to the bottom to pick up the rest of her bikini so she could leave them near the edge. Once she was finished with that, Penny began taking slow laps around the pool. Just like it happened before, she couldn't believe how easily she adapted to underwater life. A month before, she was discovering her true nature. Now she was gliding around her own pool as if it were no big deal. In actuality, it wasn't. She was her mother's daughter, and her mother was a child of the ocean, which meant that she was also a child of the ocean, albeit somewhat removed. With a smile on her face and a quick flick of her tail, Penny headed quickly to the deepest part of the pool before twisting upward and thrashing her tail as hard as she could. She breached the surface and sailed nearly 6 feet into the air before bending at the waist and diving back into the pool with a large splash. She wasn't worried about being seen. Along with the construction of the pool, her mother had the heights of the fences raised to 10 feet, giving them increased privacy against inquisitive neighbors. She sank to the bottom of the pool and rested there, laying on her back. Penny placed her hands behind her head and stared up at the wavering, shimmering surface. She drew a deep breath as she slowly flapped her tail up and down, all the while imagining what would happen during the rest of this wonderful summer. So now we're on to chapter 11, The Accident. And this will be the last chapter that I'm going to read, at least for today. Through the month of July, Penny's days became one of hanging out either at her pool or at her friend Kamina's pool. She knew how to control her transformation when she was in deep water, so there was no fear that when she was swimming with Kamina, she'd flip over into mermaid mode. But at the same time, she felt the pull to change and swim free as herself, and there were times when fighting the urge seemed incredibly difficult. It was for this reason that she always swam early in the morning and after dark in her own pool. She loved the nighttime swims especially, because Lee would join her and they'd spend several hours together while her mother told her stories of what she remembered of her time in the pod. Since Penny's mother worked, it wasn't unusual for Kamina and her to be alone in the pool during the day. Lee knew she could trust her daughter not to engage in any activity that could harm either of them, and she was also aware that Kamina was not the sort of girl who would fool around and put her daughter or herself in danger. For her part, Penny knew that swimming with her friends was all done on the honor system. The first time her mother suspected they were doing something which would cause trouble, injury, or even death, that would be the last time she would allow them to swim alone. Penny wasn't worried that her mother would stop the pool parties. As it was, most of the time Kamina and her sat under the shaded area listening to music and talking. That didn't mean the unexpected couldn't happen. Penny was standing under the canopy, enjoying the shade and watching Kamina swim across the pool and pull herself out at the far deep end, climbing one of the 2 portable ladders placed there, something she had already done 4 times. The 5th time, however, she was walking quickly back towards Penny when she stumbled and fell forward. Before she could get her arms out to break her fall, she struck her head on the concrete and rolled over into the water. Penny watched in shock as Kamina bobbed once before sinking. It was only then that Penny sprang into action. She leapt into the pool and quickly swam toward her friend. By the time she reached her, Kamina was a dozen feet below the surface, unconscious and sinking slowly. Penny got her arms under her and kicked hard for the surface, But even though she was a better than average swimmer as a human, the combination of weight and water resistance prevented her from making any headway toward the surface. Penny was faced with a dilemma. She could allow her to transform into her true form. Now, just a few feet from the bottom of the pool, she wrapped her arms around Camina and began thrusting hard with her tail. They shot to the surface with enough power that they flew nearly 2 feet out of the water. A last-second flip of her tail pushed them beyond the edge of the pool, and both girls dropped to the hot concrete with a thud. While she didn't know CPR, Penny knew the real secret was getting water out of Camina's lungs so she could breathe again. Fortunately, her lungs were perfectly suited for that task. Clamping her mouth over her friends, Penny sucked all the water out of Camina's lungs before looking up and expelling it back into the pool. She then began breathing as much air as possible back into her friend, compressing her chest each time to expel the carbon dioxide. Because Penny's lungs were not human, she was breathing oxygen in Camina's lungs with every breath, ensuring a greater possibility of survival. After nearly a minute, Camina's eyes popped open as she began coughing. Within a few seconds, her breathing was back to normal, thanks to Penny extracting all the water from her lungs. She blinked twice as she looked up into her friend's face. "What happened?" "You slipped and fell into the pool." Penny touched the gash on Camina's forehead. "You hit your head, too. We're going to have to bandage that." Camina swallowed before touching her wound. "Yeah, you got me out?" She pushed herself up onto her elbows. "How did you—" Penny didn't need an explanation for the shocked look on Camina's face. She'd been so concerned with saving her friend's life that she wasn't able to transition back to her human legs. Not that it would have mattered, as she was too far from the edge of the pool to be able to slip into water and make such a transition possible. She put on a brave smile as she rolled on her side and faced her friend. "Yeah, about that." So there you have it. The next few chapters of my original story read, and on Tuesday, I will read more. I hope you enjoy this, and I hope you want to hear more. Leave me a message down at the bottom and tell me what you think. Take care. Bye.